Hey guys, Dave Maxey here from HomeMusicStudio1.com. I got several questions this week that I want to address under the topic of routing. How are my tracks typically routed inside my DAW for any typical project that I do? And so I put together an image for you that this is something I'm going to make available. If you're watching this video on YouTube, look in the description. You can download this. There'll be a link there you can click on, and that'll get you what you need to download this. This is a JPEG image, and I'll explain what we're looking at here in just a minute. If you're watching this on HomeMusicStudio1.com, look at the bottom of this post. You will see a download link for this image as well. So the question comes in, you've got all these tracks. In this case, on this image, I've put together what is probably the most complicated set of routing in any given project, and that usually has to do with the entire drum mix. From there, I'm showing you what I also use in what I term bus mixes. I'll talk about that in just a minute. From there, I finalize my project in what is called a mix, or often in the industry we would refer to this as the print track. And then that actually outputs to the master fader itself, which is where any rendering or export of your project to a WAV or whatever format you're using is going to take place. So we've got several elements in here, and routing can certainly be extremely complicated. And it just has to do with understanding what we're trying to accomplish in the end. So I'm not going to go through every little detail that I've created in this image. I want to make sure that you get time to kind of mull this over on your own. It's as simple as just following the arrows of ins and outs for maybe some more questions that you might have. But the bluish, depending on if you're colorblind, maybe purplish arrows there are what I use to represent my reverbs in this particular project. Anytime I use a reverb or a delay effect, any type of effect that I'm not trying to alter the original source signal, I always recommend using what I call an auxiliary track to apply that effect. So you'll see over here, I've got a mono effects track and a stereo effects track. These are actually stereo tracks, but the reason I coined this term mono is because I prefer to use on my kick drum and my snare drum more of a narrower stereo. In the stereo field, I like those effects when it comes to reverb to be a little bit tighter toward the middle, sometimes 100% mono. In order to achieve that effect, I create a stereo track and just use the width knob in Reaper. By the way, this is what you're looking at here in Reaper. Your DAW might have something similar. So I use one effect, reverb. They're identical other than the width on that just for my kick drum and my snare drum. And you'll see that the additional track here called the kick aux mix is going out, following this blue line into just this mono effects. Same on the snare, going out, going over to the mono effect. And then you can see the mono effect then follow this line up here, actually returns into a effects bus mix, all right? Let me clarify one thing, and then I'll address those buses in just a minute here. So when I'm using effects such as parallel compression, in this case, in this particular project, I'm using parallel compression on the kick drum as well as on the snare drum. And you can see that this track right here is the original snare track. This is the original kick track. I've got a track next to it that I'm parallel compressing. If you're not sure what that is, hang around Home Music Studio 1 long enough and you will find out. A very powerful effect with parallel compression. Those two tracks are then mixed together by a third aux track that I call the snare aux. This just gives me the ability to have one track control all the snare drum as opposed to having to balance these two out with the parallel compression effect that I'm using. Same thing with a kick drum, okay? So really the focus of this quick video, though, is just to show you how I'm routing those tracks, okay? So that's how we're getting there. You can see that all the rest of these tracks over here that represent the rest of the drum kit, hi-hat, toms, overheads, this is a stereo track, so there's a left and a right overhead blended into one stereo track. Same with room mics, the stereo track, left and a right room mic. Those effects output, you can see them up here by this bluish line, down to the stereo effect track, okay? And then that, in the same with the mono, comes up here to my mono effects, or I should say just my effects bus. Now, my preference in routing is I typically will do a 4 main bus mix, okay? And so I like to have in this little note right here, anything that is a vocal track, backing vocals, any type of vocal effect, lead vocals, you name it, anything that is the vocal itself on the dry side, not counting delays or reverbs, are going to actually output into this vocal bus. Just like I've combined several different effects on several different tracks down into one, what I call aux track for the kick, the same thing would be true if you had a lead vocal and you were doing parallel compression or adding some stereo width or many of the things that I've talked about, even in some of the tutorials, where you might have multiple tracks that you're blending together to make up one lead vocal. Those are going to dump into a lead aux track, and then that lead aux track is going to dump into this track up here, the vocal bus. The same thing would be true with backing vocals, okay? So that's how my preference is to route that. That just gives me a massive amount of control. What we do with that is beyond the scope of this tutorial, but anything that is music, I classify as anything that is not bass or drums or any type of percussion. The aux outs, the auxiliary outputs or auxiliary tracks from anything, multiple guitars, maybe you've got multiple mics on a guitar cabinet where you've sent them to another aux send. I highly recommend doing that if you're not in the habit of doing that. Multiple keyboards, multiple synths, multiple acoustics, or whatever it is. Typically, I will dump them into their own aux send, each grouping together. So acoustics will have their own aux send, electrics will have their own aux send, keyboards and synth will have their own. All those aux sends are also going to dump into this music bus. In other words, they're going to output into this music bus. So when my mix is complete, I can control everything that's a vocal from this main fader right here. Everything that's music, I can control from here. Everything that is bass and drums, just like this setup is routed right here, also gets its own bus, okay? This allows me to control the entire bus, the entire mix of the bass and drums together. I do some compression and some other EQ and tweaking on this buses as well. And then lastly, I have an effects bus. This allows me to take the output from anything that is at a delay, a reverb, whether it's stereo or mono. I dump those outputs not directly to the master fader. Let me open this back up here. Not directly to the master fader. I'll show you that in just a minute. But they go first into an effects bus. This allows me to actually automate kind of the energy of the song. As I'm moving along and I want a little bit more overall effects, I can bring that up or down, and that's typically why I use that as well. So back looking at these tracks, this is a great example, whether it's a guitar aux that I just talked about or vocals or keys. This is a typical way that I would route them. And so what I'm doing here in this case, to clarify, I've got all of these tracks down in black. You'll see their outputs. Each individual drum mic comes out. The aux send from the aux track from the snare drum and the kick drum outputs, they all dump into this main drum aux, okay? This allows this control right here. This is kind of the first stage where they're all blended together. Have the ability to do some EQ, some light compression, some, whatever needs to be done, parallel compression, whatever. It gives us the ability to do just a little bit of that along the way, as well as blend them together and get one point of control. Those then output into this bass drum bus, as we talked about. The bass guitar, whether it's a single track or whether it's multiple tracks, whether you're using some kind of parallel compression effects, whatever you're using, the bass guitar is also going to get its own aux track, just like the kick drum, just like the snare drum, and then that will output directly to the same track that we are inputting the drums together with, okay? That allows me then to tighten up the bass and drums as a cohesive unit, and they represent the rhythm section of the song. Bass and drums are absolutely paramount into any type of project that has full instrumentation in there. So with that, take a little bit of time to just mull over this image. Again, you can download this below the bottom of this video. There'll be a link to do that. If you've got more questions, definitely let me know. I know this is a little bit of a quick explanation, but just follow the lines. The black lines represent the outputs and ins of those tracks. The bluish purple, depending on your color blindness or not, represent what I'm using for auxiliary to apply effects. And this is the most common way that I'm routing my tracks. Lastly, we'll finish up with once my tracks get into the bus mixes, those bus mixes I actually output. And by the way, all these tracks are stereo tracks unless they're noted otherwise. So I output all of my bus mixes into one final stereo track right here that I call the mix track. And also in the industry, this is often referred to as the print track. This is where if I need to do any final stages of saturation, New York bus compression, final EQ, maybe high pass, low pass filters, whatever I want to do to prepare this track to begin to render out. I do that in this final stage. This also allows me to control my output level. I like to make sure that my mixes do not peak any greater than -6 dB on a render. I don't have time to talk into the reason why that is. From there, the mix or print track dumps into the master fader. And in the typical case, I don't have any inserted effects on the master fader at the mix down point or render, okay? So the master fader then is basically as is. Obviously in the screenshot, I've got some effects inserted there, but when I do a typical render, it'll just be no effects. Master fader is what it is. I'm only using it for the reference of the meter, and I'm controlling where my peak is on that master fader by the overall volume of my mix track or my print track, okay? So from master fader, that's where we get our output and our render. And so kind of zoom in here, you can see that all my tracks dump typically into aux mixes. From aux mixes, they go into bus mixes. From bus mixes, they'll dump into a mix track or a print track. From the print track all the way up finally to the master fader. If you're not used to the complex routing, I highly encourage you to make sure you get a DAW that can do these features. Reaper can, Pro Tools can. There's a lot of DAWs out there that are very powerful in order to accomplish these. This is the typical way and the general routing that I use in many of my projects. Hopefully it's helpful to you guys. Definitely let me know if you got more questions. Until next time, this is Dave with HomeMusicStudio1.com.